So, no water at all. So, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you all very much for coming this evening to our event with a project to study the 21st century. Firstly, I'd like to say how grateful we are to be hosted by the European Interagency Security Forum and Christian Aid, whose space they've very kindly provided us with tonight. One sort of piece of parish notice in terms of outline for tonight, before I introduce the panel, is who we are as PS21. We were founded a little over a year ago. We really started holding events in January this year. So far, we've managed to average almost an event a week, I believe, if not an event every two. You can find us on online at www.projects21.com, where we've been tackling all the big sort of global issues of today. And we've had everything from financial crash to the Middle East, and now seeing as probably our first in terms of social or humanitarian concerns. So I'm very excited tonight to be able to have a really good panel to tease out some of these issues. I'm really pleased to see you all here as well to take part in that debate. For tonight, we're going to be looking at humanitarian response and using Nepal as a case study, and then opening up to questions for the remaining 40 minutes or so. I've been told the bad news is that we have to be moving on by around 8 o'clock. The good news, though, is that we managed to sort out with a pub where we can actually take the real discussion from after here, and that's at the Caroline Artichoke, is that right, Ruth? So just down the road, and we will be shepherding those people who would like to continue on after this. Also, just so that everyone is aware that we are on the record tonight, and panelists are speaking in a private capacity and representing necessarily their own organisations, and that's something just so that we can have a good free-flowing debate. So firstly, to introduce, well, I'll introduce myself. I'm Tom Beasley. I'm the company secretary for PS21. On our panel, we have from my right and going on, we have the operations director for a charity called Serve-On, providing response through urban search and rescue and sort of water search and rescue to international events. And Dan will tell us a lot more about everything else that Serve-On is going on with. We have next to him Barnaby Willis-King, who is a research fellow for the Humanitarian Policy Group at the Overseas Development Institute. We then have David Sanderson. David has recently been compiling a report for the DEC, Disaster Emergencies Committee, and whilst can't answer everything that's in the report, soon we'll be able to get some of the general themes that will come out from Nepal. And finally, we have Kate Gray who's a senior program manager at Options Consultancy. Options have been heavily involved with the Nepalese government on healthcare, and so Kate will be talking about hopefully welfare and the impact that something like the disaster report has on those programs. So this is who we are this evening. We've got lots that we can discuss. I thought I might just start and kick off with David and say, so what are the general lessons that we picked up from the report?
Well, the first thing I should say is that the report from the Disasters and Emergency Committee has yet to come out, so I'm not, it would be wrong for me to talk about any specific stuff. So anything I say is not related to the member agencies to the EC, so it's more general, so just to be very clear on that. Cool. Where would you start? I mean, I don't know what you think, but it seems that Nepal and the word preparedness, the word earthquake, was synonymous for years, and also the word urban. I mean, we were all getting ready. If you were to talk about where there would be a disaster in the world that was urban, it was going to be the Kathmandu Valley, and heaven forbid it may still be, of course. It's almost certainly a when, not an if. This earthquake happened in Gorkha district in the northwest. What everybody was getting ready for. Darn it. They have a habit of being like that, right? But there it is. And so it was a bad earthquake. There were 2 earthquakes, of course, and hundreds of aftershocks. So they were bad, and they caused, what, nearly 9,000 deaths. 500,000 houses at least have fallen down, and a lot of damage. 7.5 billion is needed, something like that, of which just half has been met by the flash appeal. So we're in a context right now where there's an enormous need. What else to say? There are 14 districts that have been specifically designated as the most disaster affected, although more were affected than that. 3 of those are in the Kathmandu Valley. What's apparent is that the earthquake's damage is particularly visible in rural areas. And of course, many of those are far-flung. They're hard to get to. They may take days of hiking, literally, to find some of these places. Not all have yet been reached by aid agencies. So there's a complexity of the terrain, a difficulty in terms of access. The monsoon season is upon us, and winter is coming, and other climate issues, of course, of snow. So there's a real need right now to address and to look at those issues. It's hard, it's difficult. No one was really ready in the sense that the last big earthquake was 1934. That's what, just outside living memory, really. And so how to prepare for these things? This is a place where there is a lot of preparedness, a lot of clever people have worked for a long time. And at the same time, this earthquake took people by surprise. So those are my opening thoughts.
Dan, you deployed with a team of 8 to Nepal, and actually almost, I mean, we were talking about preparedness, you'd actually been to Nepal a few months prior. Is that's correct?
That's right. So we were, December, we were invited out through a Gurkha-led project to train and attend training alongside the Nepalese Risk Reduction Consortium. So it's a multi-agency but local. Had a lot of work streams. We were invited in almost as a, see what you can share your experiences of just what I'd call sharp-headed and immediate response. Assessment work. It became apparent quite early that it wasn't as bad as the terrible one that fortunately possibly expected. The information was slightly different, and before deciding on numbers and what we put out there, because although we're a USAR team, all the heavy kit, we decided to put an assessment team, so a reconnaissance team that can do search and rescue, can do medical, but can also get to remote areas and share information, try and get the right resources. As I say, we knew that transport would be difficult. It's a very busy place. I think it's 40,000 NGOs in the country. And we also knew that we had contacts to help us move quite quickly. So we were able to, we just pulled out from flying the same day because of the equipment schedule changed. So we arrived the next day.
And you one of the first teams there, or were there many people already on the ground?
We were about the 4th team formally to arrive, but obviously that's great. But obviously India has a very big response to flights in there, China, and by the time our team returned from the rural areas that we went to, there wasn't a country furniture doesn't seem to have a team there, and a set of aeroplanes lined up and all sorts of things for filling the space. We arrived to less damage than I've experienced before. So from a personal responder point of view, very different for our rescue workers than, say, Haiti, where you are literally having to make your way through bodies. And the numbers were hundreds of thousands rather. And it was more a case of making sure you're making the right decisions and finding out what needs to happen. So from an early perspective, there was, and it's not a problem, this is what happens, it's a disaster. There wasn't much coordination. But we train and think and act in a way that makes us comfortable with uncertainty. And you have to be at that stage in order to try and help bring certainty to various elements. So, difficult to get some direction, but there were people forming it up, and there were some undapped members from the UN, with one in country was working. And we were able to do some initial searches of buildings that were hospitals, schools, and then very quickly realised that the teams were queuing up to try and find jobs, and best way of describing it, people want to do, they want to make a big difference. They've got a big team, and there's a big hotel, and there's lots of cameras, and that's why we do our thing. I'm sure that's why people really want to do that. From my perspective, because I was leading the team at the time, and shared with the team, we're an assessment team, so where don't you know stuff, and would you like us to go there? Was our sort of initial thoughts, which is why we came back to City very quickly and went to Norway.
And Ken, you had people on the ground already in Kathmandu and supplying a healthcare program. Could you just tell us a bit about what that program has entailed and working with the Nepalese government, and then really what kind of preparedness or not might?
2 weeks before the earthquake hit, and the findings were not so prepared was the conclusion, and I think that's been borne out to months. The programme now has shifted focus and is working very much around trying to move out of the humanitarian phase and providing support as the transition and recovery process gets underway, and really kind of rebuilding systems following the destruction that was experienced, because obviously it's not just the immediate physical destruction and loss of life, but whole processes, systems, ways of delivering services are disrupted, not just by the earthquake, but by the influx of support and the work plans to deliver emergency responses. So trying to kind of unpick that and really establish services within government processes, as I'm sure everyone would ultimately wants to be seen.
And finally, so sort of step back a little bit, just look at the international system as a whole. I guess you could describe it as complex, would be a nice consultant language in my day job, and fast moving or slow moving. I mean, in looking at it and in those sort of crucial first few days, was it up to the rigour at that stage?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, and I think Nepal's a really good place to look at that question, because it was the country that I lived in Nepal for a few years, and it was what everyone was planning for, everyone was preparing for, and yet, despite that, the initial response was chaotic, it was uncoordinated, it started to kind of get itself together. But I think it's really important to kind of remember where Nepal's come from in terms of, having had 10 years of civil war, still a very weak government, very, very contested politics, no constitution, which just has all these ramifications in terms of all the structures that we really do prepare as a community level, because the bodies that are meant to do that, aren't in place because of the constitution. So in terms of the ability of the international system to sort of lock into something and in advance prepare, that's the challenge. Then you've got the logistics. I mean, I've been in the back of WFP land cruises in the kind of high mountains, and it's a nightmare even in the dry season. So the challenges are enormous. I think the other dimension that's really important to bear in mind, and you alluded to it, is, and it's complex, is the wide range of actors. And I think this is something that we see at ODI, is the kind of the changing humanitarian landscape. It's getting more complicated. China is particularly in its near neighbourhood, but more broadly is taking a really big role. India, hugely important in the whole. So how they kind of then connect to the sort of established systems through the UN or not connect. And then a really important angle, I think, which gets overlooked but is raising in profile is the role of the local organisations. You know, communities are the first responders. Local organisations. There's been a real change in Nepal in terms of a lot of sort of solidarity between communities, which has been really notable. But again, how do you get all of these different moving parts, the local, the national, the regional, the international, together? That said, I think you know, there were a lot of search and rescue, a lot of medical teams who managed to deploy, who did a reasonable job. I think, you know, there are lots of problems with coordination, and I think that's something that Nepal is no different from a lot of other natural disasters. And as we move to recovery and reconstruction, I think even more difficult. So yeah, I think it's a good case study of how some things have worked, but some things are, you know, the same as they have been for a while.
And Dan, clearly as a team leader and actually being in with a lot of these meetings, what's that like when you're trying to coordinate activity and represent what you can do and get that wrong?
Yeah, early on there were team leaders without teams. They were still out of the country. And there is a bit of a bun fight over places to bring your team to do stuff, putting it bluntly. And I say, there's a lot of egos, there's a lot of people infighting, there's a lot of people who need to justify either representing their country or their sponsor organisation or whatever. And people do get very concerned about representing them, whatever it is, very well. Perhaps to the point that they don't choose the right course of action for the best outcome, or it slows you down because you're thinking about different priorities. We were in a nice position in that our culture is what's the right thing to do. And yeah, we're a little bit overwhelmed, but one of the key things that's really simple for any responder at any level is, what is the situation? What's the incident information, or what's the large? And there are huge gaps. So it's very simple from my perspective, going to the second team, say, we'll give this a gap. Anyone you want, we'll go and take that. So from my perspective, that was quite easy. I don't have the same pressures as my Prime Minister sent me, and I have 200 people in aircraft, and I need to use them and receive them all the time. So we have a different context. I'd say though, in terms of teams talking to each other and being civil and productive and helpful, it's better than any of the other disasters situations. And I did see, China, Russia, USA, India, Israeli Defence Force, Gulf states, Polish, Turkish, wow, awesome, very good. All around the big table and all in big meetings. And they were as easy as this is at the moment. And and it is chaos. So when you look at it from a distance, and when you look at the hindsight, which we all don't have, it'll always be chaos, because the reason you're there is because it's going from chaos to try not to. And it's how effective do we do that, which is, in pockets we I say it changed markedly. We were fortunate in that spent a bit of time on operational networking in a previous trip. We were able to put the chap who handled the helicopters for the Nepalese Special Forces, the British Gurkhas network, with UN. As we were leaving to drive into the mountains, nobody was talking. So there's a multinational military coordination centre across a dirt football pitch from the UN coordination centre. And the most interaction is to nod to each other walking past. Yeah, they've got the helicopters to people. And you've got all these things. And as we left, I put your name to people, saying, just speak to this person. I've already spoken to him. He's in helicopter. He's heading off on his own adventure. But it was really pleasing to see, coming back from our remote area that we put in a reconnaissance and lots of requests, that is now happening. So the helicopters that we mentioned were flying for you may have were using it. So, you know, it's an extremely complex. There's not enough helicopters early enough and things like that. So things just disappear. And I'd say more than any place we were expecting chaos. It could have been worse.
And Tony, around chaos, so there's one group who aren't here, which is really the Nepalese government, the host government, who presumably feel they have to play part in this as well. Was it overwhelming when you've got big organisations coming in, UN, big charities coming in? I mean, how long does it take for them to get a grip back onto what they're trying to achieve?
The Nepalese government activated, I think it's called NEOC, within 4 hours of the disaster. There was an awful lot of preparedness on that level, and it worked in terms of the immediacy of getting together and organising and starting to do things. I mean, that's certainly on the record as being a statement. The government is taking a strong control of the disaster, and that's how it would be perfect. It's quite interesting. International NGOs can't implement directly. They need to work through national civil society organisations, which is quite a thing actually, because that's the connection that needs to happen. The government is in the driving seat. Certainly in the early stages, it's very clearly on the record that the government made some decisions and then reversed those decisions and changed decisions. And so agencies implementing, seeking to work in that context, were dealt an extra level of complexity when it relates to how to work in those areas. Also in the 14 districts, there's an awful lot of power in those districts. The district coordinating office of the DCO is strongly in control. And so what might happen in one district may be different in another. And so there are different operating environments relating to how all different actors work. So there are levels of complexity. And also, as you say, there's no constitution. I mean, it was only, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, it was, the king was in charge, and now it's a different world. And so there's a shift there. There's no Natural Disaster Management Act that's been discussed, the updates in 2007. So there is an opportunity there, given these terrible events that have happened, to actually come out with a world-class disaster management act. Why shouldn't it be that? Why shouldn't that be an outcome of this terrible event? So there's a whole context of complexity of governance systems which aren't perfect. Of course they're not perfect. With which actors like yourself, I guess, and others in aid agencies are working and trying to do the best they can.
And Kate, on that, as an organisation such as Options, clearly you have a relationship, or a long-standing established relationship with the Nepalese government, but you also have, I guess, stakeholders, relationship management with donors or clients, and I just wondered if we could explore that for a little bit. So what was the reaction around the incident there, and how have you found managing those relationships since?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. So the whatever brings its own agenda and its own desire to help in a particular way, its own modus operandi, and I think that adds another level of complexity in terms of trying for the government to be on the receiving end of not only individual agencies and operators, but also governments, donors that they've got bilateral or multilateral agreements with. And who are potentially trying to work in slightly different ways. So that's certainly an added layer. Just to pick up on the point that you're making, the government in the individual affected districts, those coordinating groups are essential, as well as the central level government. Those are really actually where the power is realised. So in terms of health, the district health officer is theoretically the one focal point coordinating work between all those different agencies, and that very much the extent to which that individual is able to effectively do that depends on the context in which they're working, the strength of the response in that individual district, and their own skill as a coordinator. So it's very much a localised response as well as the central government doesn't really mean anything when it comes down to can this person do their role in this instance.
And finally, on the role of state and sort of government, it's one of those classic exaggerations questions about moral imperative versus national interest or state interest. I mean, how much of that was played out in Nepal, for better or for worse?
I think natural disasters are, for governments wanting to sort of show support and solidarity, are a very straightforward way to kind of demonstrate support, you know, at a human level, but also politically. And so I think compared to sort of engaging in Syria and the complex politics of conflict, responding to natural disasters is politically more straightforward. And I think the speed with which governments kind of send teams, I think there's a mixture of different motivations, and I think there is, you know, clearly humanitarian wanting to support people, but there's also the messages that you send in terms of the wider relationship. And I think that applies both to kind of Western governments, those that sign up to kind of good humanitarian donorship principles, as well as, you know, the regional powers, China and India, who approach things in a different way kind of operationally. But those kind of bilateral relationships are really, really important. And you know, interesting comparison with Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines, where China was really heavily criticised for in the region, and came under a lot of criticism for sort of playing politics because of the political disputes they were having in the region with the Philippines. I think what you see in Nepal is, and you know, there's been different takes on it, but a rivalry between India and China, which plays out in Nepal in all sorts of different ways in terms of vying for influence. I think from what you've said in the sort of early operational stages, I think everyone was trying to kind of find their part of the picture to sort of do their bit in and sort of divide things up. But I think as the kind of reconstruction gets going, I think it's going to continue to be really, really important and will influence it. But I think the way that all governments think, I think we have to be realistic about how, you know, they have a mixture of interests for sure.
Yeah. And Dan, on that, did you find that you found yourself representing a British approach as against an American approach against a Chinese?
I've been responding to host nations colours, if you want, so you have your flag. And even though you say I'm not representing the UK response from NGO, we were dealing with that. So I'm obviously informed as to how ISAR works, which is you do find pressure to little groups coming together saying, well, you've got to get these guys in, or not, or because people are racing, there's only so much space to land, there's only such a footprint to put things on, all the big aircraft, and people wanted to get ahead of other people. It's probably natural. I did find, I don't know, maybe on this mission or the way we train, where we do something, I found myself able not to get dragged into it. It's quite straightforward because out there is something more important going on, so you can separate yourself from that. But we're all at different stages and under different amounts of pressure. There definitely would be individuals whose key things, we'll get people in here, we'll get on the ground, we'll get a camera pointing at it, and we'll hopefully pull out baby. If not, we'll still look concerned and hold on to them. There's a lot of that. It's just that that's how you get manipulated through the system.
Well, I know you've mentioned it as a scenario where there was something like 200 responders for one rescue.
Yeah, there was a rescue, brilliant rescue. It's great. Initially a dog, that's the important thing. And great deal in the city, large collapse, a dog located. The tricky thing is locating different people. Then it's digging and moving. No, it's hard, but you don't know where. So that's a dog. And in the end, as well as the enormous crowds, there's over 200 rescue workers from most nations, and the stretcher got carried hand to hand. We weren't able to do that. We were often mounted steering. We were searching buildings as well as doing that. The problem being that someone heard there's a rescue, and because it's not like Haiti where your sector's full of potential rescues of dead people and all the rest of it, people were moving from place to place to get in on it, to be part of it. Initially using just logic and topography and what have you, you divide up your area into zones. You allocate the right people to those zones, they go and assess it and ask for the right resources to clear it. It's not a case of I want to make as many residents as I can. It's not a football store or similar. It's our job is to clear this space. And while we're doing that, and everyone was dead, great stuff, because so-and-so from wherever found someone without their space, but this one and we able to work together. Teams are coming around to that, but it's an interesting dynamic and it's an interesting type of person that does rescue. And there's a lot of very strong alpha male need to score more points than people. But it's getting better and better.
So you're kind of chattering. Is that something you've seen? I mean, how do charities try and preserve their independence at the same time as being coordinating and involved in these situations without getting sucked into the scenario we just heard about?
Tension, isn't it, between agencies on the one hand, there is a need for branding and marketing, and that's understood, and it's the t-shirt thing, and that's part of the media age we're in, where we all can take photographs and stream movies, so that's understood. And of course, at the same time, the collective effort of the coordination. So to me, your example, where you work there, but you would also work there too, is a powerful one. Among agencies, there's always the opportunity to get better at that, to always coordinate more. So to feedback, we have this cluster system, better than was, many would say, in the last 10 years, where you organise essentially around the goods that are delivered, around some water or shelter or food or whatever it might be, broadly speaking. And it's not bad. Of course it could be better, but it's not bad. It's better than what was there. That's certainly what most people would probably say. But in terms of the feeding back of individual agencies to the collective and being more than the sum of the parts, it's always a challenge. It's a challenge in Haiti or Guyana or Pakistan, you name it. And also a challenge. And so it's not a competition, it's not that. It's a collaboration and recognizing also that there are individual mandates and individual, what's the word, presences that need to be maintained.
And Kate, I suppose the emergency gets declared as if the emergency has now come to an end, but there's still a huge amount of work to be done. And can you tell us about how options sort of moved into that transition phase?
Yeah, well, the transition phase now is about kind of building back better is the government's catchphrase, what they're trying to ensure that both the humanitarian response and the reconstruction isn't just about replacing what was there before or a quick cut to what's needed in the immediate aftermath, but to actually ensuring that that what is returning is better than what was there in the first place. Build that better. Of course, says what it doesn't tick. Actually, there are, I think, probably echoes of the challenges around coordination in the immediate aftermath in terms of realising that build back better, because NGOs, donors, agencies, the whole lot come with their particular areas of expertise or their agendas or their t-shirts or whatever, and there is a lot of kind of fighting around the spoils of what is being then developed. So to take one particular example, in the health sector there was a huge amount of damage done to health infrastructure, and building a hospital or a health facility is a visually very impactful thing to do. It's very important as well, and that is therefore quite an attractive prospect for lots of agencies. Fusion of available support in that particular area, and a certain amount of aggression kind of a rock value approach from some organisations which are really trying to ensure that they get their prefabs built, I think it's fair to say. And prefabs aren't necessarily building back better, they are an immediate response, a necessary response, but not always the most appropriate long-term response. That's not to say that they're not necessary by any means, but it's just an example of how sometimes fighting for spoils can be.
Well, it's interesting. I want to broaden out and move to questions in a minute, but before we do, just to pull into the overall space and the overall lessons that we can take, I wanted to almost pin it around the word urbanisation, given the fact that the world will not get less urban. It seems that it will get more potential. People seem to potentially fall down, and so this will become more prevalent. I mean, is this something that you're thinking about now, and in terms of what ought to be sort of the textbook Nepal can do value? Does this transplant into future?
Cool, yeah. You touched on the big shift. I mean, cities are growing around the world by 1 million people a week. It's almost unbelievable. If UN Habitat's right, it's 180,000 people a day. And it's to throw the dice really whether you think that's good or bad. I mean, many people say, it's engines to growth and there it is, but then there are fears. Better or, for better or for worse, that's the way it is. Cities are growing massively for a variety of reasons. Mostly people being born in them, by the way, not people migrating. It's a bit of a myth. It's people being born in cities, it's the overwhelming majority. And it is a new landscape. We talk, aid agencies, we talk about working in the field. We start calling it field work in the neighbourhood. I mean, to be slightly, it's not field work, it's neighbourhood work, and there's a difference in the shift. And it's learning new tools. And there's been a lot on this, especially since the Haiti earthquake. That was a big wake-up call, really, although beforehand that was known. But it is the new landscape. The new landscape is the cityscape, it's the neighbourhood, it's the buildings that fall down because of the lack of enforcement of building codes in societies where governance is weak and corruption is rife, and that there's a causal link between corruption and disasters. And it's absolutely on the record with evidence. So we need to get better at that and work more in urban complexity, and that's really hard. That's so easy. It's really hard.
I mean, presumably you can't tell a developing country not to urbanise if that's how they see modernisation, and they might not even be able to stop it even if they wanted to. So how does the system deal with this?
I think that the priorities for a developing country is really hard. I mean, when I was living in Nepal, this whole sort of double think of, yes, the whole city could fall down tomorrow, but I don't have the money to build my house with concrete mortar rather than mud mortar. It's quite an irrational thing, but it's very common, I think, in human behaviour. So I think you do have to look at the institutions that you have, the building codes, and more importantly, the sort of culture around that in terms of people realising it's important. And that's partly enforcement and partly sort of changing the way people are educated, so getting into schools. So there's a whole shift, and I think it's a massive challenge, even in stable poor countries, to kind of devote the resources you need. When you've got a country which is emerging from civil war, still very conflicted politics, to get politicians to sort of to really focus on something that is a sort of far off abstract concept. I think what would be really interesting in the Nepal situation, and I think this is sort of something that you see in other disasters, how long the window of opportunity where you go, well, that was a big earthquake, we really need to do better. How long that will last? And I worry, and I think it's already, and you've probably been in Nepal more recently, but actually are still, for most Nepalis, where's my next meal coming from? And it's not sort of, oh, I should reinforce that, that little strut in my house that's a bit weak. And that's the problem of both the sort of community level, but public policy. And I think the role of the international community is to kind of share best practice and customise it to the local situation and fund it. I think the same thing in Nepal. There was a lot of work on institutional change, funding things, but it could only go so far because of the politics in the country.
Okay, so you're thinking about this adoption, so presumably healthcare is an enormous issue in terms of urbanisation and development?
Yes, it's not a specific focus of the programme, so we provide kind of cross central support to the government across the country, and then some more focused support in particular districts. And there, which is a hugely political thing, I think. Urbanisation does require a big shift in the way that services are delivered. Often primary healthcare is structured around the idea that you have these kind of clinics that people travel to from far, and that there's only one, and you make sure that it can provide one service. If you're working in an urban environment, actually you've got a mix of public providers, private providers. The competition is a lot more real, and it requires very different systems, delivery, design, and approach. So it's certainly a big challenge that a lot of people in the Bali government is kind of waking up to. But actually, I do think that in Nepal, there's a very particular balance whereby, yes, there's urbanisation to a huge extent, but you've also at the same time got incredibly remote communities. Remote in the way that remote communities aren't remote in most parts of sub-Saharan Africa or Asia. You know, they're up a mountain. So there is both the need to, and the earthquake really showed that you've got both densely packed population in Kathmandu, but you've also still got villages in the far off districts that are still barely being reached, and the flow of goods and services and support to those districts was patchy because of their geographical location.
And Dan, on that, I mean, Nepal for you kind of represented both the city and also these remote communities. Has this changed your thinking about response?
Yeah, and I know that on the response front, it goes in cycle. Big identity destruction teams around the world to mobile fleet. I think what's really interesting is that, without being disrespectful, say the comes away within 9 years, that's awful when you look at death and destruction. The model that's predicted will bring Kathmandu down. The water is brought in vans to Kathmandu. So the diminishing workforce in the countryside and the food situation is pretty tricky. The water gets brought in tanks. It's an old basin, isn't it? A lake. The model is at the 8 point something plus, which would clearly flatten most of it. You know, we do. Then the infrastructure much less than it was this time. And add to that the fact that the only way in is the very small airport. Well, that's expected to liquefy and become usable for a good 2-3 weeks on that one. So the people who will help themselves will be there, or will be walking in or helicoptered in this small team. So, and I recognise this was from the people who came up with the New York plan, that they were modelling for this horrendous situation, which that wouldn't touch. And, you know, I don't know where we'd be beyond the scale of the things we face. But that the people who modelled that are working towards saying, let's plan on no one gets in here. Let's try and build a community resilience. Toughly on your own, but it's the immediate responsibility to really forward that will be of use, because actually all of these people falling on top of each other getting in there wouldn't have anywhere to land anyway for the time they need it. That's the worst case model. So when we were landing at the attacked airport, nice runway and seeing most of the buildings up, thinking, oh, this is terrible, which is where we ended up going forward quite quickly, getting into there. So a bit of doom and gloom, future for that. But and it wasn't necessarily in my opinion, but a very senior Nepalese figure who was involved in the National Resilience Risk Reduction Consortium that put this together, did say, it's awful to feel like this, but the best thing that will happen is we will have that, and we will flatten everything, and whoever's left will rebuild it properly. It's a pretty hard thing to take, but the idea of changing it to what it should be from what it is now, like you say, people will go, oh my God, we're facing this any moment. Well, at the moment, forget it, we stop planning.
Well, I don't know about anyone else, I found this fascinating, and I'm sure, I hope that there are questions that you'd also like to put to the panel. Anybody want to raise a question? Pip,
Oh, thank you. Actually, it was really interesting. I don't know much about this campaign or what you do, and you know, the reporting back is going to be a great learning program. I was just wondering, for me, it's kind of like you've got this emergency scenario. It's around the improvisation that you feel that you take effects in the situation. And I was trying to think then, like, at a community level, the emergency for a widow who's lost her husband, or somebody who's lost their kid, and we have, a prospect of dignity around burial, etc. Where is that recognised, and is that left and the organisation? Right, is a really real consideration for people.
Yeah, at that stage there is a protocol issued to all teams as to either cultural considerations, depending on the country and what have you, or the process to be followed. And where possible, even if you're helping out, the removal of dead when you're there to look for the living is an interesting thing. So rescue teams go to save all lives as a priority, and then but where possible, any part of that, we use local people embedded into the rescue, embedded into the rescue, giving people a purpose and a direction. And I'd say that I've witnessed people in the situations you've talked about, also in Haiti, where I lost count of the places that gave bad news to children and dead babies. They would join in rather than sit and nothing happen. So they'll sit in a pile of rubble with their dead kids for as long as you want, and someone comes along and gives them the bad news, but says, this is it's really important. And I think all the social and psychological bit, we didn't really deal with engaged in that news for a few people, unfortunately. And then we moved on, and of course they had another earthquake, and then the monsoon. And they're tough people, but that's a lot to take.
Thank you very much, everyone. And very interesting things coming perhaps from different perspectives of my experience. The name's Human Grant. I've worked in Bosnia and Ukraine and Central Asia, mainly on international law enforcement projects. And my question is about similarities and differences in coordination. When in Ukraine, we were administered an operation managed by the UNDP. And I have to say, the two individuals in succession who did that were extremely bureaucratic, quite frankly, despicable individuals. One of the rigidity, lack of flexibility was astonishing. Mr. Cook's point about the example of the UN and the multinational military forces. Why weren't they talking as far as you know? And if you had to allocate blame, who would you blame? And secondly, perhaps for everyone, you mentioned that a number of things had got better from previous experience. Perhaps specifically, perhaps in relation to Haiti, given circumstances. Are there any particular issues which were better, and maybe why, and perhaps things which were better, which pleasantly surprised you, so perhaps we can grasp those and see, build on those. I mean, that will drag up some of the problems later. I'm sorry to have to say, in Ukraine, the first UN person was anything even worse, and I couldn't help contrast his attitude and his personal characteristics, which were in such incredible contrast to the professionalism and conduct of the operational German staff. It does really make me wonder about those staff being seconded, serving national personnel, not UN people.
Well, being half British myself, I'm not quite sure how to respond to that myself, but I just wonder on the wider piece around the UN specifically and its own nature. Has that, and tying it in with the piece about things being better or worse than Haiti, did the UN learn from Haiti in the example in Paul?
I could, yeah. Simply, yeah, without doubt, there was the standing up of clusters that made functional work a lot easier. The different, very different. I have to say it's positive. It's you always hear people get competitive and mode or control. Blame-wise, it's not a blame thing, and it wouldn't help. I think walking across the road to talk to those people who have got uniforms on, or walking back the other way to say, "What do you do? We're here." It probably didn't occur because people have a function. I've got to get this done, and it's probably just that thinking under pressure that sometimes pulls people into a narrow channel. Maybe we're a bit.
Were the UN people uniformed people?
Mixed, all mixed. Yeah, I'd say we were right at the early found. There wasn't a UN coordination team when we started, and the attitude at the time of that was positive. It was easy to work with. We got good feedback. Got really good understanding of the way we were able to put things across. So we were able to communicate what we were seeing from a wider context than search and rescue, including health, commerce, security, transport, buildings. I'd have to say I had a really positive experience on that, across and finding out what other people do on a military basis. And it was maybe because we'd already been there, and maybe because the way that my little team works is that we do go and say, "Hello, what do you do?" and we're
Was that with Nepalese or with other international? You said you'd already been there.
Yeah, with British Government support and Nepalese military and the various agencies that are government, Home Office, the health as well. So yeah, and of course the plans they've got, like you say, it is chaos. The plans they've got was something that you could refer to and say that these agencies, their roles and responsibilities.
They took account of chaos.
I think so.
David, in terms of progression from state, I know that it's always bad practice just to say from one event to another, but in terms of sort of broad sweep from Haiti onwards, it says that Haiti being a step change, what went right in Paul that might not necessarily have gone right in Haiti, and what are people looking on to improve even further?
There are a number of things happening now that weren't happening so much there. Two or three. One is, as we discussed in this, what we started about communicating with disaster-affected communities. A shift from we tell you this stuff to being more two-way. And technology is something that's been very powerful in that, radio, of course, but also handheld phones. Mobile, smartphones. Smartphones, I mean, it's a powerful thing. The use of smartphone technology for assessments, where we can quickly do assessments and send information back very quickly. That's very powerful. The one I would say is the real game changer is the use of cash, giving people money, cash transfers. It sounds obvious, if you're not from this world, give people money, really. It's very powerful, and it's very powerful because the transaction costs are super low, you can be super efficient, you give people more autonomy to do things. There are downsides, I mean, we can talk about those, but broadly speaking, when markets are functioning, cash is working very well, and the accumulation of evidence has been very positive. That's very powerful stuff, and they will almost the one where cash was even more mainstream than even Hainan. And typhoon Hainan, I mean, the World Food Programme's number one way of doing this now is don't bring people food, give people cash. That's the World Food Programme, that's very powerful. Think about it. Cash is as important as food and water. That's very powerful, there will be more of that.
We tend not to hear that. The media tends not to highlight that.
Maybe it's not very interesting, but it's I mean, it's great, sort of yawn. I mean, and touching what we used to get. I mean, the high visibility hospitals. One of the sectors that's really hard is shelter after disaster. It's really hard. It's very difficult to get housing right. One of the problems of housing is it's visible and you can see it, and there's a marketing impetus to deliver the housing. Cash you don't see, and some people think, give people money, won't they spend it on the wrong thing? Which is deeply patronising, of course, and it's not perfect, but show me a sector that is.
But you know, the accumulation that's very powerful.
It's very interesting. A question for David, because you have a long history in shelter. There's a lot in shelter, as far as I know. And so I was wondering, we're talking about accumulation of evidence. Have you seen any evidence from the past being applied to the whole on shelter?
Yes, there's less of the transitional shelter. The idea that you have tents, you have permanent houses, they're hard, they're easy. Sometimes it can be years to get to the permanent. So what's dominated a lot of aid for the last dozen years, more or less, very frankly speaking, has been the transitional shelter. The risk of, and it seems a good idea, something that will last 3 to 5 years. And it is a good idea. The problem is that soaks up money, and often it doesn't turn into permanent. And then, you know, that's a super simplification of a lot of it. There's been less of transitional temporary shelters, more a delivery of goods, especially CGI, corrugated iron. Now that's good and bad. I mean, it's good because it's cheap and it's durable, and you can deliver it stacked up and distribute, and that's the default response. The problem is it's hot in some views. Then there's no easy answer, because if there was that, we'd all be doing it. It's a really, you know, it's a really hard one. But that said, I think it's true to say there's been a progression of learning. Hwayam is very good around, well, very good, you know, broadly speaking, there have been relatively good responses of reaching a lot of people with some stuff. Ideally, everybody gets a house right, but that's not affordable. That's not affordable. So what's your best fit of coverage and cost and logistics? And in Nepal, it's been really hard because of the terrain. And if you double the cost of material by just trying to get it somewhere, just transportation, you double that cost. Then you're half spread, right? So that's hard. So there's a continuum there, and you know, the shelter crowd is thoughtful and knows this stuff and works very hard at getting better at it. And this undoubtedly will be part of the story. The opportunities in Nepal are building by using traditional techniques, which are well known, which are very good, using local materials that are seismically well enacted, and the knowledge of that's been around for decades. That's the challenge. Any other questions? Yeah.
So my question's for everyone. So I was in the region at the time of the earthquake, but I wasn't actually in Nepal itself. But I had colleagues and also friends, just Nepali people living in Kathmandu at the time and then in the immediate aftermath, who told stories of how at the time you couldn't move in Kathmandu for tripping over an NGO worker. And so looking at lessons learned, I was wondering what your thoughts are about that huge influx of outsiders coming into Kathmandu when there was a shortage of water, shortage of safe places for people living, shortage of tarps to string up to protect people from the rain, etc., etc. Going forward, lessons learned.
I think it's a really good point. It's really hard because I think the way that the system, if it's a system, works, is very much stuff gets sent, and so you do end up with this sort of, lots of really great, motivated, hardworking people who want to help, but it doesn't necessarily add up to the, what you would design if you were starting from scratch. You end up with lots of people, and you end up with, inflated sort of rents because you've got so many foreigners coming. You end up with the airport being powerful. I mean, I think the key to it is going back to kind of being better prepared, and the government and local authorities being in charge and sort of saying, and they did say, we don't want any more medical teams, but they need to have the right expertise to be able to do that, and the right capacity. I mean, I think Nepal had the same experience as the Philippines and Haiyan and countries affected by the tsunami in 2004, where coordinating the international response was as overwhelming as the actual natural disaster. And certainly if you look at the Philippines, the typhoon that happened a year after Haiyan, the government of the Philippines said, look, actually we don't want any international help because that's really, you're distracting us from the response because we're having to manage all of you. And that's pretty bad indictment. If countries say, look, you know what, thanks but no thanks. But that's the way the world's moving, that countries are asserting their sovereignty because they see the problems. And I think the international community has to really understand, and it is starting to go, well, how can we work better with governments and with local organisations to do that? But at the moment, the system's a long way from that, and the way that it's funded and the way that it's controlled and coordinated, it's a long way off.
Okay, and it's interesting we talk about when the emergency occurs, everything piles in. When it moves to transition, does everyone just pile out again? I mean, what's it like?
Yeah, so some organisations are piling out, and in some ways I think that's fantastic. So some of the best work I saw was the Norwegian Red Cross had set up a tent hospital in central Norwich, and we're just delivering services. And when we went to see them, they were saying, yes, we are handing back to the government on this date, and we have done our bit. We have set stuff up. Time to go now. You know, there are people here who are better at this than us, and will be off. Thank you. So in some cases, I think that withdrawal is absolutely what's needed. You know, by doing jobs that people can do themselves, that entirely people can do themselves, you're not actually helping things in the long term. But there does need to be that sudden influx of support in some very particular areas. So I welcome that move out. I think you don't want to see services, essential services being delivered outside of the system. I don't think that's the long-term answer to anything. And yes, I think that's it.
Phase where what you want to put on there, if the country was a piece of toast, then you could just spread what's needed like butter, be awesome, wouldn't it? But it's got to come through a tiny bit hole, so it's got an air. And there were times there where the government, who were pretty good at working together, we always had a government representative, senior, who was coming to the team leader meetings and saying, this is what we now want. And all right, some people don't listen, I'll take this. Oh, you don't need what we do. The job we came to do was get out there. And actually, the UN coordination was like that. You know, that's how they much go. It's the job done and moved away. It's nice and straightforward. But there's also a period where what needs to go all the way out and around here and has to come through this tiny place to get to it. The messages go out, no more of this. No more of this, please. Because we can't coordinate it right now. And if it was because we can't coordinate it right now, we will take further in. But the barriers went up. Now, similarly, if a government no more of these, please, it should be, responsible organisations should respect how we do it. Whereas the amount of diplomatic twisting and turning and reasons why we could carry on a little bit, people still arriving for 24, 48 plus hours on exactly what was asked not to happen is a bit unfair, it's a bit selfish, it's a bit like, I want to go, can I? There were definitely, certainly when we went away, did our work, came back into the city, it was just filling up. And there's a difference between, I suppose you're dispassionately compassionate, I think, if you're going to be a responder, be a volunteer and an NGO, but professional on your thinking and your actions and your values. And from our perspective, it was get out of the way was our bit. I'd say on the ongoing element, looking forward, there is a really structured, organised, it's quite military and quite rescue and all that. And when we get the rescue phase, we tend to cut it and get out of the way, like we did, hating it. And then some of what's there for coordination is lost. Some of the relief we get a bit. I only know that from friends who responded on a medical capacity, hated. And then I met them at an incident here, and he said, I was going because it wasn't this. He was there a month after I left. In the back of my car, there's still a street map done by Matt Hapshin on the daily report that had all sorts of detail and structure and different elements were really important. And that had gone. And you only expect it to improve, but it had gone down. So a bit of continuity is really important.
I think we've got time for one last question, if anybody. Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to pick up on the bit that you finished with. And I think you were paraphrasing someone who said the best thing that could happen is that when the running can be wiped out and the water will reflect later. I just wanted to ask the rest of the panel if you think that's a problem for regional agencies.
I think that was a comment actually from somebody in the Nepalese government.
It wasn't for me. Said quite calmly, they said the reality, in their opinion, was that the way that this place will move forward is to get rid of this massive thing that's coming. And whoever's left standing, people need a strong and proper narrative. And that sounds really brutal, but that's just what they say.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think any of the agencies would sort of endorse that, and I think it reflects. I think it reflects the enormity of the challenge. I mean, if you've been to Canberra, it's a very old city with these narrow streets and 5-story buildings that you don't want to walk past even when there's not an earthquake, they fall down. So the idea of you just can't, with the existing housing stock, you can't improve it very far. And so I think even a really rich country would struggle. So I think it was probably sort of like, well, the best thing that could happen in the long term would be a fall down. And actually, if you look at the last big earthquake in 1934, which destroyed quite a lot more of it, I mean, it was a smaller city then. Actually, the bits of the city that are kind of best suited are the ones that were rebuilt after that earthquake, because there was a bit more open space, sort of bigger roads. So I think that's probably at the back of people's minds. It's like, well, actually, clearing it out a bit. I think I mean, it's a dreadful thing to say in some respects, but I think it reflects the enormity of the challenge.
Do you guys agree with that? That it isn't obviously not the best thing, but there isn't actually a real change in fact to do without something else happening?
I think there's always hope. I think part of the reason that Nepal hadn't got the housing stock that it should have and the buildings weren't in the state that it was, despite the known risks, is precisely because of the gap in time from the last massive earthquake to this massive earthquake. That's more than a lifetime's, that's not within living memory. And so the fear is very abstract. And I think there have been other countries, in Chile, for example, has been very effectively, very forcefully policed implementation of laws around housing. And before it's meant that fear, that imperative, that pressure from civil society remains quite high. Whereas in Nepal, actually, you had an entire generation of people who've never experienced a big earthquake, and therefore the pressure doesn't really, the social pressure doesn't build up to enforce things in the same way. Whereas I really hope that now actually people are scared to go into high-story buildings. You can't buy no one's going to buy a high-story, a flat on the 4th floor anymore, in Kathmandu. So you'd hope that some of those kind of market pressures and other social pressures will mean that actually housing stock can slowly improve and things can get better. I don't know if that's just blind optimism, but I believe that can happen without.
That's not a good strategy. I mean, it's without being flippant. I mean, in Gorkha district, it's amazing. In Gorkha, we're pretty close to the epicenter of the earthquake. Buildings you would think would have fallen down did not fall down. You can see them; they did not fall down. You've seen them. There are an awful lot of strong buildings there, and building codes, like almost everywhere in the world, are good. The issue is enforcing them. You can retrofit, and there are tons of projects in retrofitting schools and hospitals and doing that, and it's costly, but of course it's the political world. It's the iceberg thing. It's all the stuff under the surface, the politics, the governance, the corruption, all those things, and getting that right. That's within our ability to do that. And choose your city. There are thousands, tens of thousands probably, at risk of climate and flood, earthquake, and there will be more cities growing 1 million people a week. And we need to rethink how we do this and take it seriously. But no.
Well, on that, ladies and gentlemen, on that prospect for the future, I'd like to wrap up our discussion tonight. I think it's been absolutely fantastic, and I'd like to thank you all as well for your participation. I shout out again for the European Interagency Security Forum for helping to facilitate tonight's event. They've got some literature at the back of the room as well for anybody interested in more of these issues around humanitarian security in general. I'd also like to mention that after this, there'll be very much an opportunity to continue the discussion, probably off the record and with a glass of wine, which will be a lot of fun, just as fun as this, but with wine. And then for those who are real troopers and want to continue the debate even further, we've got the pub as well. So I do hope everybody can join us both for drinks afterwards and for the pub. Final thing from me is just to mention some upcoming events, PS21, for those of you who've enjoyed this evening. We're planned, so we're sort of waiting to get these up onto the website, but we are looking at the 21st of September, an event on the dark web, and that's going to be moderated by one of our really good panel for that. On the 24th of September, the UK Cabinet Office is hosting us for a discussion with the Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction, John F. Sotko, and he's going to be joined by Catherine Dixon from Transparency International, because he's currently looking at the question of where all the money went. Somebody in this room might know an answer to that? I don't know. Please feel free to join us.
Yes, I do.
Okay.
The problem is that many others do.
Yeah.
They're not the same.
And also on the 29th of September, an event with the Young Professionals in Foreign Policy, where we're looking at the UK Strategic Defence and Security Review, moderated by Tom Brookster at the back, and who is one of our global fellows. Who will also be joined by at least one American and a Frenchman on the panel as well, to tell us what allies really think of the United Kingdom. So hopefully, should that go ahead, that'll be interesting as well. Otherwise, that is all from the formal part of tonight, and I do hope everyone can stay around for drinks. Otherwise, I'd like you to join me in thanking the panel.